Hello everyone, it's Hitesh. Today I'm going to be doing a Shogi openings video, which I haven't been doing for pretty long since when I made a summary of Saginomiya's Joseki last time. And today we're going to be looking at side pawn picker opening. Actually, I did two videos before that covered side pawn picker, but I couldn't get far enough to go into the primary lines, partly due to the time limits for each video at that time. But I don't have any time limit now, so in a couple of videos from now on, I'll try to give you lessons on some famous variations in side pawn picker. But for today, I'm going to be doing a introduction to those variations. So let's get started here. Now, as you might already know, what we're seeing on this screen is the basic position of side pawn picker opening. If you're not familiar with how we can get to this position and some of the variations before this position, you're recommended to find my older videos, side pawn picker number 1 and number 2. You'll be able to find them in the earliest ones in Shogi openings playlist. Let's just go over the moves from the beginning. So from here, black plays pawn to 7f, white 3d. After they open the bishop's diagonal, they push the rook file pawns, and then gold to 7h and gold 3b, and black plays pawn to 2d. And white takes and rook takes it. And then white will play pawn to 8f, black takes, and white takes with the rook. Okay, so here the main book line at this position is rook to 3d, taking a side pawn, which will bring us into the main variations in side pawn picker. But before that, let me talk a little bit about something else, because here you might be able to see another alternative that is quite tempting. You see it? Well, actually, I'm going to show you that it's not going to work, but let's just see it. It's this bishop trade here. And after the silver takes it, isn't there something that it seems to be worth trying at least? Well, it's this bishop drop to 7g, because it's actually forking the rook and the silver. And yes, technically this is a fork, but some of you might not be able to find this because it's easy to forget that this silver on 2b is a floating piece. But well, if we remove these two pieces out of the board, the gold and the rook, I guess you can easily see this bishop fork, right? Because obviously this silver is a floating piece. So it's a very simple bishop fork, right? But when we have those pieces, gold and rook, suddenly it's hard to see that this silver is a floating piece. But let's just try to consider it as this way. Basically this rook is attacking the silver, and the gold is protecting that silver. So the thing is, 1 minus 1 is 0. So technically there's no difference between this position and the one without these two pieces. So always try to consider this kind of piece, the silver, as a floating piece. Okay? So now this bishop drop to 7g is pretty tempting. But the thing is, this bishop drop is not going to work, because to begin with, this rook can just go back to 8b, protecting that silver. And what is more, this rook can simply promote to 8i, taking the knight. So black goes ahead to taking the silver with the bishop, gold takes it, and rook promotes. So two-piece trade here, and both rook have promoted. Okay, but here at this position, white has a very good move. You see it? Well, it's dragon sack to 7i, taking the silver. Because after the gold takes it, look at this bishop drop, king dragon fork. So the game's over. And even if black tries to block the dragon here, the dragon can just go back and take this lance, and black has lost too many pieces, and white's better here. And alternatively, black can make the two-piece exchange, starting with the rook here, and keep the bishop on the board. But well, still white is better here. White can simply drop his knight to here, 8f, attacking the gold. The gold cannot run, so maybe horse to 8h, but white can just ignore that and take the gold. So it's definitely better for white. Okay, so as you can see, this bishop fork following this bishop trade here is not going to work for black, which will now bring us into the main Joseki line, and it's rook to 3d, taking the pawn. Okay, so at this position, what black is threatening in the next move is he's going to take the bishop on 2b by his bishop, and look at this. White can't take it with either of the middle pieces. If he takes with silver, the gold will fall. And if he takes with the gold, the silver will fall, forking the king and the gold. So white is in big trouble. So basically white has to deal with that threat at this position. And basically there are three options for white here. And most often played one is this. Bishop to 3c. Well, this is a very popular strategy in professional shogi. I think it's more than 90%. So after this move, black will play rook to 3f, stopping white from taking a side pawn. And from here, white's strategy will branch off into two kinds of strategies. One is rook to 8d strategy, in which white retreats his rook back to 8d. Well, actually, he can do that immediately here. So now basically he's threatening to swing his rook over to 2d in the next move, attacking the knight. So here black will play rook to 2f, attacking the knight. White blocks it with the silver. And at this position, now white is threatening a strong attack in the next move here. You see the line? Well, it's pretty tricky. Actually, he's threatening to drop his pawn to 3h in the next move. Well, black always has to be careful about white's pawn drops on the third file, which is possible because black has taken out this pawn in 3d. So, after this pawn drop, after black takes it, now white can make a bishop trade here and drop it to here. As I've said, 1 minus 1 is 0, so it's forking the rook and the silver. And the thing is, because of this pawn sack on 3h, the rook cannot run to 2h, protecting that silver. So, basically, this is what white is trying to do in the next move. At this position, so then black will play pawn drop to 8g, blocking the rook. And now once again, now black is threatening a very good attack in the next move. Which is, now he wants to make a bishop trade in the next move. And you can see white can't take it with either of the middle pieces, right? Taking with the silver, loses the knight. Taking with the gold, loses the silver. So, white can only take with the knight, but here comes this bishop drop to 2a, attacking the gold, and you see the gold cannot run. So, one option would be saving the gold with the king, but black can simply sack this bishop and make this gold sack. If white takes it, the rook can promote, and also if he runs, pawn drop. And well, if he saves with the silver, well then simply black can drop a pawn here, and white's gonna lose that gold. So basically, white will have to remove that threat, and the book line from here goes into two variations. One is king to 5b, which is an older joseki. Well, in this variation, white will make a castle called central house, like this, which is a very good castle for side pawn picker opening because it defends widely his own camp and it prevents any rook drop or bishop drop in his own camp. And the other variation, which is rather a newer one, king to 4a, after which white will castle a king like this, which is called Nakahara's king. This castle is very strong against a rook's attack from the side. So this is also a very good castle in side pawn picker opening because there might be a rook trade at any time. Okay, so that's the basic idea of rook to 8d defense. So let's go back to this position. Okay, so another strategy for white here is actually rook to 8e strategy, which is a pretty new strategy, and it's more popular than rook to 8d strategy these days. This strategy was invented by professional player Makoto Chusa, so we also call this strategy as Chusa's rook. When he first used this strategy in a professional shogi, his opponent thought he put the rook to 8e by mistake, intending to move it to 8d. But it wasn't a mistake. Chusa put it on 8e on purpose. Alright, but in rook 8e strategy, white can't simply move his rook immediately at this position, because if he does that, black can simply chase the rook by moving the knight over to here at any time. Well, he's not necessarily do that now. He can do that later on. But basically, after rook runs to 8b, for instance, black can simply block it with a pawn, and it's not really good for white. So the idea of rook 8e strategy The rook stays on 8f, and he moves to silver instead. And after black drops a pawn, then white will play rook to 8e. And he'll try to swing the rook over to 2e in the next move, so black will play rook to 2f. And well, basic idea of this rook to 8e strategy is that the rook is more mobile than when it's on 8d, because even when white develops these pawns, for instance, the rook can stay mobile along this e rank, right? If it was on 8d, these pawns will block the rook. And moreover, white can simply drop a pawn attack in the rook anytime. And also, well, after he makes a bishop trade and develops this knight, he can force a rook trade anytime. And he'll do that after making Nakahara's king, which is strong against any rook drops from the left. So, those are the basic ideas of these two strategies, rook to 8d and rook to 8e strategy. Oh, and also, when white is trying to use rook to 8e strategy, black can actually try not to accept that strategy. He can do it by not dropping his pawn to 8g. So for instance, he plays gold to 3h, white will play king to 4a, but black doesn't drop his pawn, so king to 5h. So at this position, white may give up going for rook to 8e strategy, and he simply moves his rook back to 8d. And if white sticks on that and makes other moves, such as gold to 5a, well, black has an option of making a bishop trade from his side and develop the silver to 8h, putting pressure to the rook. So here, the rook will have to go back to 8d anyway. Okay, so these two strategies, rook to 8d and rook to 8e, are the primary book line of side pawn picker. And recently, rook to 8e is thought to be the better one. Well, but the thing is, these two strategies are very, very difficult. It's hard for me to explain it to you in these videos. I'm gonna have to study hard myself before making those videos. So, well, let's go back to here. So let's see other alternatives than this bishop to 3c strategy. There are two other options, and one is knight to 3c, which is called knight to 3c strategy. And basically, yes, black will move the rook to 3f, protecting this pawn. Oh, but there's a very interesting line in this strategy, and it happens after if the rook moves to 2d at this position, trying to drop his pawn in the next move. Well, here comes a very tricky variation, and it's knight to 4e, attacking 5g pawn, and suddenly opening his bishop's diagonal. And this is very exciting and dynamic opening. I think I'll cover this one in one of my videos in the future. So now let's see the third option at this position. Okay, so the last one is the most exciting variation. It's bishop to 8h, making a bishop trade. And actually, we hardly see this variation in professional shogi. Well, the reason is all the lines that follow this position are all fast and fierce and tricky attacks from white. But the thing is, if black deal with those correctly, white can't bring it into a favorable position for him. So that's why professional players don't use this one. But in amateur shogi, if you are playing white, I think you should at least try this variation and see if it works against your opponent, because it's very hard for black to deal with these attacks correctly. So, well, after white makes this bishop trade, there are three strategies which are all exciting and dynamic. One is pawn drop to 3h, which is called pawn to 3h strategy. And number two, it's pawn drop to 2h. Well, but the name of this strategy is not pawn to 2h strategy. It's bishop to 4e strategy, because white's going to drop his bishop to 4e later on. And the third one, the last one, is the most exciting one. And I guess this is one of the most exciting and dynamic openings in shogi, is rook to 7f, taking the pawn. And this is called double side pawn picker. So in the next video, we're going to be looking at this double side pawn picker opening. I think it's going to be a very exciting video. So hope this video has been useful. Take care, and I'll be back with another one real soon. Goodbye.